Here's something that genuinely kept me up one night. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Dragons are everywhere. You've got the dragons in Game of Thrones. You've got Smaug sitting on his pile of gold. You've got the dragon on the flag of Wales. The dragons winding through Chinese New Year parades. Dragons in Norse myth. Dragons in the Bible. Dragons carved into temples, in places that had never heard of each other. Big, scaly, snakish, usually breathing fire, usually guarding something, usually the biggest, scariest thing in the story. And here's the part that should mess with you a little. All these cultures, they never met. An ancient Chinese farmer, and a medieval English knight, and an Aztec priest never got together and agreed, all right, here's what the monster looks like. Big lizard, wings, likes caves, don't trust it. There was no group chat. These people were separated by entire oceans and thousands of years, and they all, independently, dreamed up basically the same creature. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern, and patterns have reasons. So that's what this whole video is. This is Real Roots, the real history behind the stories you love. And today I want to actually answer it. Where did dragons come from? Why does every human culture keep inventing the same monster? And I'm telling you now, there are real answers. They're way better than people just liked lizards. And by the end, I think you're going to look at that Game of Thrones dragon a little differently. Let's start with the one that honestly is the coolest, because it turns a bunch of ancient people into accidental scientists. The bones. Here's the situation. You're a person living 3,000 years ago. You don't know what a dinosaur is. Nobody does. The concept won't exist for another few thousand years. You have no idea that entire species lived and died before humans ever showed up. Extinction isn't a thing you know about. And one day you're digging, or a river's washed out a hillside, and you find a skull. But not a normal skull. A skull the size of a car, with teeth like daggers, bones bigger than any animal you've ever seen or heard of, all jumbled together in the dirt. What do you do with that? You can't go, ah yes, a Cretaceous theropod, been extinct 66 million years. You don't have that option. All you know is something enormous, with huge teeth, was real, and it was here. So your brain does the only thing it can do. It reconstructs the monster. It fills in the gaps, and the thing you build in your head to explain those bones. That's a dragon. And this isn't me guessing. There's a folklorist named Adrienne Mayer who basically pioneered this whole field. She wrote a book called The First Fossil Hunters. And she found something wild. Out in the Gobi Desert, in the exact region the ancient Greeks and Scythians got their gold from. The ground is absolutely littered with the fossils of a dinosaur called Protoceratops. And a Protoceratops skeleton, I'd really recommend pausing and pulling up a picture, has a beaked face, 4 legs, and a big bony frill that, when it's weathered and half buried, looks a lot like the start of wings. A 4-legged creature, with a beak like an eagle, sitting in the desert, right next to the gold. That's a griffin. That's the griffin, basically bone for bone. The legend of the griffin, the eagle lion that guards gold in the eastern deserts, comes from the exact place these skeletons come from. The people mining that gold were tripping over the evidence for the monster and carrying the story back home. The monster wasn't imaginary. It was a misread fossil. And it's not just Greece. Go anywhere ancient people dug, and you find this. In China, this is even more on the nose. For literally thousands of years, Chinese medicine has used something called dragon bones, long gu. Ground up, put in remedies, sold in markets to this day. And here's the thing, dragon bones are fossils. Actual dinosaur and ancient mammal fossils. For most of history, that's genuinely what people thought they were. The bones of dragons. They were finding dinosaur skeletons and going, yep, dragon. And honestly, given what they knew, fair enough. In fact, some real dinosaur species were first discovered by scientists following farmers to the spots where they'd been digging up dragon bones for centuries. And giant bones weren't rare either. That's the part people miss. Ancient people were finding this stuff constantly. Mammoth skulls, for instance. A mammoth skull has this huge hole in the center of the forehead. It's where the trunk attached. And if you don't know what a mammoth is, that big single hole in a giant skull looks an awful lot like a socket for one enormous eye. A lot of scholars think that's where the Cyclops comes from. Same process. Real bones, No science, best guess, and the guess becomes a monster. So that's answer number one, and it's a big one. A huge chunk of the dragon myth might just be prehistoric animals, remembered wrong. Ancient people doing paleontology with zero science and a lot of imagination. Staring at bones they couldn't explain and drawing the beast that must have left them. Dragons as a kind of memory. I love that. That alone could have been the whole video. But you don't even need fossils to get to a dragon. Which brings me to the second reason, and it's simpler and a little scarier. There are real animals that are, functionally, small dragons, and some of them are trying to eat you. Start with the crocodile. Specifically, the Nile crocodile, which lives right in the cradle of civilization, right where a huge amount of early human storytelling comes from. A Nile croc gets up to 16-20 feet long. It's armored, it's ancient-looking, genuinely prehistoric because it basically is. Crocodiles have barely changed in 100 million years. It lurks in the water, invisible, and then explodes out and drags a full-grown human under to die. If you were a person living on that river 3,000 years ago, that animal is a monster. It is a scaled, armored, man-eating reptile that appears from nowhere and kills you and vanishes. You don't need a fossil. And it's eating your neighbors. And the ancient Egyptians knew it. They had a crocodile god Sobek, powerful and dangerous, because when the thing that eats you is that terrifying, you make it a god. That's a recurring move, by the way. We'll come back to it. Then add the snakes. Giant ones. Pythons, anacondas, animals that can swallow things you genuinely wouldn't believe, that coil and crush the life out of prey, that show up in the mythology of basically everywhere, as this primal enemy. And here's something important. A lot of the oldest dragons in myth aren't the winged fire breathers we picture. They're serpents. Enormous serpents. The word dragon itself comes from the Greek drakon, which basically meant a giant snake. The Norse had Jormungandr, the world serpent, a snake so big it wraps around the entire earth. The Bible's dragon is that old serpent. Over and over, the original dragon is just a snake. Scaled up, in every sense, because the snake is the animal that has been killing and frightening human beings since before we were human. The dragon and the giant serpent are the same fear, wearing slightly different outfits. And then, just to really drive it home, there's an animal we literally named a dragon. The Komodo dragon. 10 feet long, 60-70 pounds of muscle, forked tongue flicking, venomous bite, and it eats things as big as water buffalo. It ambushes deer and pigs, bites them once, and then just follows them. Calmly, for days, until the venom and the blood loss drop them, and it moves in. If Europeans had encountered that animal 1,000 years earlier, they'd have said the dragon myths were confirmed. It's a dragon. We just call it a lizard because we found it after we already knew better and had a word for it. So put those two together. The bones we couldn't explain, and the real animals that genuinely could and did kill us. And you've already got most of the dragon. But there's a third reason, and this is the deep one, because it's not about any specific animal at all. It's about your brain. Some researchers have this theory, and I want to be upfront that it's a theory, not a proven fact. But it's a really compelling one, and it was laid out by an anthropologist named David E. Jones. The idea is that the dragon isn't based on one animal, it's based on three. The three predators that hunted our ancestors for millions of years, back before we were even fully human. Back when our ancestors were small primates trying not to get eaten. The big cats, the leopards and lions that killed our ancestors with claws and ambush, that dropped out of trees onto them. The snakes, scales, venom, the thing that's been our instinctual enemy so long that fear of snakes appears to be basically pre-installed in the primate brain. We're born ready to be afraid of them. And the birds of prey, the giant eagles that used to snatch our small primate ancestors right off the ground and out of the trees, talons first. It's all three. It's every ancient predator that ever ate us, fused into one ultimate monster. And the theory goes that this is why a dragon feels the way it feels, why it's scary in this deep, primal, wordless way that a mere big lizard just wouldn't be. It's not random. It might be assembled out of the three oldest fears we have, the ones written into us before we had language. The composite nightmare of everything that used to hunt our kind in the dark. We didn't invent the dragon so much as remember it, in our bodies, from a time before we were us. Whether that last part's literally, provably true, We can't say for certain. But man, does it explain the pattern. If the dragon is built from instinct, if it's stitched together from fears every human brain carries, then of course every culture invents it. We're all running the same ancient software, and the dragon is what that software dreams. Okay, but here's a wrinkle. Because if dragons are all the same monster, built from the same bones and beasts and fears, why are they so different depending on where you go? And this part's genuinely fascinating. Because the differences tell you as much as the similarities. Because Western dragons and Eastern dragons are basically opposites. In Europe, the dragon is a villain. Full stop. It's evil. It hoards gold it has no possible use for. It burns villages. It demands sacrifices. It steals the princess. And the entire point of the dragon is that a hero has to go and kill it. Saint George slays the dragon and becomes a saint for it. Beowulf, an old man by then, dies killing one. Sigurd kills the dragon Fafnir. Smaug has to go. The Western dragon exists to be defeated. It's greed and destruction and chaos with wings. And the story is always, always about a brave person putting a sword in it and taking back what it hoarded. Go to China, and it flips completely. The Chinese dragon, the long, is one of the luckiest, most respected, most beloved symbols there is. It's wise. It's benevolent. It's associated with strength and good fortune. And crucially, it brings the rain and controls the rivers and the seas. Emperors literally claimed to be descended from dragons. The dragon was the personal symbol of the emperor himself. The dragon throne. Ordinary people, to this day, proudly call themselves descendants of the dragon. Nobody is trying to slay it. You would be overjoyed and honored to see one. It's a blessing. Same base monster, opposite meaning. Why? And the answer is actually kind of beautiful, because it comes down to what each culture needed the monster to be. Europe's storytelling grew up soaked in a tradition where the serpent is the enemy, the snake in the garden, the deceiver, the tempter, and in a warrior culture that prized above almost everything, the hero who goes out and kills the monster. So the dragon became the ultimate monster, the final boss, for the ultimate hero to prove himself against. The dragon is there so the knight can be a knight. But China's dragon got tied to water, to rivers and rain and the sea, and China was a vast farming civilization whose entire survival, whether millions of people ate or starved, depended on the rains coming at the right time, and the great rivers not flooding and not running dry. So the creature that controlled the water wasn't your enemy. It couldn't be. It was the single most important force in your life, the thing whose mood decided whether your children lived through the winter. Of course, it's benevolent, or at least respected. You don't slay the thing that feeds you. You honor it, you build it temples, you make your emperor its descendant. Remember what I said about the crocodile. When the thing that controls your fate is that powerful, you make it a god? Same move, opposite feeling. Europe met the dragon as a predator to be conquered. China met it as a force to be revered. Same monster, two civilizations, and each one carved it into the exact shape of what it most feared and most needed. And this is happening everywhere, not just those two. The Mesoamericans had Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, a snake, but a magnificent sky-associated god-tier snake, one of the most important deities they had. Aboriginal Australians have the rainbow serpent, an immense creator being tied to water and the land itself, there in the oldest continuous stories on Earth. India has the Nagas, serpent beings tied to water and treasure and wisdom. The Mesopotamians, some of the very first city builders, had Tiamat, a great primordial dragon of the Salt Sea, and their myth of a god splitting her body to make the world is thousands of years old. Everywhere you look, the same raw ingredients, the serpent, the water, the fear, the power getting shaped into a monster or a god that fits that specific people's world. So where did dragons come from? After all that, I don't think there's one clean answer, and honestly, I think that is the answer. They came from the giant bones we dug up and couldn't explain, and had to invent a beast to account for. The misread mammoth, the weathered protoceratops, the dinosaur skeleton that had to belong to something. They came from the real animals, the crocodiles and the pythons and the actual, literal dragons, that genuinely could kill you and did. They came from something older still, from the 3 ancient predators wired into the back of the human skull, the claws and scales and talons we feared since before we could speak. And then every culture on Earth took that same raw material and shaped it into whatever it needed. A monster to slay so a hero could exist, or a god to thank for the rain. That's the thing about myths, and it's the thing I most want you to take from this. Myths aren't lies people made up for fun. They're the best explanation our ancestors could reach with the information they had. Someone found a skull the size of a car, with no science, no dinosaurs, no concept of extinction, and they did their absolute best to explain it. And what they came up with, this scaled, ancient, powerful, near unkillable thing that hoards and threatens and has to be reckoned with, was so right, so deeply and strangely right about what it feels like to be a small soft creature in a world full of things bigger than you, that we are still telling it thousands of years later. On flags, in parades, in temples, on the biggest shows on television, where a woman rides one over a burning city, and something ancient in all of us goes, yes, that. I know that fear. I've always known it. The dragon isn't real, but the bones were real. The crocodile was real. The eagle that took our ancestors was real. The fear was real. And every culture on Earth, separately, alone in the dark, looked up at the unknown and drew the same monster. This has been Real Roots, the real history behind the stories you love. I want to take you out onto the open ocean, because sailors, for thousands of years, across every sea on Earth, kept coming back with the same nightmare. Something enormous rising up out of the deep, wrapping its arms around the ship and pulling it under. They called it the Kraken, and what's actually down there in the dark of the deep ocean might be worse than what they imagined.